precisely. So what does it mean? This means that there is an increase in the temperatures, which is quite high in the Arctic. But actually, can we lift a little bit this microphone, please? That would help me. Yes, thank you. Or maybe I take the microphone like this, and it would be easier. Maybe.
Okay.
Then I could be like that. Yes, thank you. It's much more convenient. Yes. So, thank you. Technical issue. Yes, I'd like to tell you some general facts about what's going on in the Arctic, actually. So this Arctic amplification means that the temperatures are increasing in the Arctic higher than the other part of the world. But it doesn't mean that it's going to be warmer in the Arctic than anywhere else. But what it means is that we have that kind of greenhouse intensification, which tends to produce a larger change in the temperature than the planetary average. So we also speak, I'm not going to give very complicated details and explanations, but we also speak of a retroactive positive positive retroaction, actually. And what does this mean? This actually means that temperatures are increasing, and then the cryosphere is decreasing, meaning snow and ice surfaces. And if those ones decrease, that means that we are going to have less solar radiations reflected towards space, because they have a very high albedo capacity, ice and snow. And we have a vicious circle, because the more it is warming, the less snow and ice we have. So the less albedo effect and less solar radiations are reflected. Therefore, we have really a problem, because this generates even more warming. And all those marvelous landscapes that we have in Lapland, and I strongly invite you to go and visit Lapland. I haven't told you, I mean, for those who don't actually know this region, this is a region which is in Finland, Norway, Sweden, and also Russia. And as for me, I've been working and living for like 18 years in Finnish Lapland precisely. And that kind of beautiful landscape you can still see with a lot of snow and ice. So, what is the situation regarding the greenhouse gases in Lapland? What is happening? This is a paradox, actually. This is a paradox, because the greenhouse gases are decreasing in Finland, but paradoxically they are increasing in Lapland. So how is that possible? Because we have only 1.8 inhabitants per square kilometers in Lapland, whereas we have like 16 in Finland. So in average per person we have more carbon dioxide than the rest of Finland. And now we have also music in the background, by the way. That's why everybody went to have other entertainment, sadly. So, do you have any idea why do we have more greenhouse gases in Lapland? Actually, I'm going to ask questions. I'm going to do like I usually do when I have public and when I have schools and when I try to raise the awareness of the Arctic environment. We have higher greenhouse gases coming from the energy sector and the transportation sector. And it is so that in the municipality of Rovaniemi, where it is darker, which is the capital of Lapland, so we have higher emissions as well, because, you know, it's still cold. So people have to import some goods from the south. They have no choice, long distances, and because it's still cold, they have to warm their accommodations. It's not the tropics yet in Lapland. And another reason why we have more carbon dioxide emissions is because we have in Western Lapland more pollution coming from Kola Peninsula in Russia. And also pollution coming from the volcano explosion in Iceland. So this is something we can observe there. And I know this is really paradoxical, but it's a sad situation at the moment. And now it's maybe a little bit, excuse me, but could we decrease the volume of the microphone? It's like, you know, I'm making a terrible resonance in my ears.
Like
Thank you. Yes. What was I telling for those who are following? Yes, Iceland, Russia, exactly, the volcanic explosion. And I'm going to tell you that we have a strategy of adaptation to climate change in Lapland and also in Rovaniemi, actually. And this is out of subject, that is what I wanted to tell you, but just a few words to tell you that, in fact, we actually plan to have new educational plans to somehow tell to people that they have to change their behavior to adapt to climate change. And for instance, this overheating in the houses that we find in Lapland, so sometimes it's 25 degrees, in accommodations of people. So now we are going to tell to people, you have to decrease, you don't need 25 degrees, 18 degrees is enough. So that kind of basic things, but it's very important. And that's also part of the education I do also already with the school pupils so that they could change their behavior in the future. Because all those small details are going to help actually to reduce the greenhouse gases. So now, if we have a look about the evolution of the temperatures, I could almost make it without the microphone because I think this is really annoying, this voice, but never mind. So, the Finnish meteorologists from the Finnish Meteorological Institute, what have they noticed? They have noticed that temperatures have increased 1.5 degrees over the past 150 years. And in Finland, they have increased by 2.4 degrees since 1847, actually, until 2013. And we have had 2 periods of warmth. Thank you for joining. 2 periods of warmth, so from 1850 till 1930, and then from 1960 till present. The water temperature has increased also as much as the air temperature in the area where the water are free of ice. And if we consider one river, which is called the Tornio River, Torniojoki in Finnish, the Finnish Environment Institute has made research which show us that there is an earlier ice breakup. And this is coming 14 days in advance compared to 300 years ago. So these are the latest results I have got. And this is very interesting actually, because some people have told me, okay, if it's warming only 1.5 degrees in 150 years, and if the ice breakup is coming earlier, only like 2 weeks in 300 years, is it much? Yes, it is. At the scale of humanity and at the scale of the planet, it is actually. And something I must tell you is that the temperatures in Lapland, they have increased twice as much as the rest of the world. So that's why it's a kind of witness of the warming in the world. And it was our Finnish president, Sauli Niinistö, who said a year ago, actually, when there was the Paris Agreement, so at the COP21, that Finland is the thermometer of the world. And this is actually true. So, these are models. So those models were already made 3 years ago when I made the exhibition, but they are still valid. And what the Finnish meteorologists tell us is that in the high emissions scenario, so high forcing emissions scenario of the most recent global climate models, we have an increase of the mid-winter temperatures equal to 2 to 7 degrees in the worst cases, so in the most pessimistic scenario. And in general, the air temperature are going to increase 1.6, 1.7 times higher than in summer, so very important. So here I want to show that to the public. Why? Because you can see the change in color. You have the past, sorry I went too fast. You have the past situation, like the 60s, 90s. You have the future situation by 2100. What can you see? Here we have more blue. So blue, this is what? Cold. And in the future, by 2100, what's going to happen? Do we have blue? Not really, sadly. So what I just told you, the increase from 2 to 7. So in the worst cases, we are going to have like 7 degrees increase, even 8 degrees during winter time. So this is going to be very important. So if temperatures increase, they are going to affect snow and ice surfaces. And what is going to happen with the average duration of the thermal winter? What does it mean actually? Other models, other colors this time. The duration of the thermal winter is going to decrease. That actually means we are going to have less days with below temperatures and fewer days with extreme below temperatures, like 30 or 40 degrees below. Here, when you have violet, what does it mean? It means that we can have like 180, 200 days with below temperatures. In the 4 other models, we have predictions, what is likely to happen with +1, +2, +3, and +4 degrees. Less violet occurs. So that means we are going to have fewer days with these extreme temperatures, maybe only 150 in Rovaniemi instead of 180, and less than 200 in the northernmost part of Lapland. So this is also kind of scary. So snow and ice conditions are changing, but it doesn't mean that we are not going to have snow and ice in Lapland anymore by the end of the century. Of course we are going to have some, but we expect that the snow cover is going to decrease by 20 to 30%, and the ice cover as well. And what else do we expect? We expect heavier snowfalls and also heavier precipitations under the form of rain. In Finland, we have annually from 500 to 650 millimeters of precipitation, and in the northernmost part we have like from 500 to 400. For instance, in Inari area, which is more in the north, 400 kilometers northern part of Rovaniemi. And we expect that the precipitation levels are going to increase from 4 to 30% by 2100. So this is going to be quite important. But paradoxically, we also expect that the occurrence of heat waves is going to increase with more frequent periods of drought. So, what is the situation with the permafrost? I guess you all know what's the permafrost. So, areas where the soil is constantly frozen. Usually we speak of the permafrost in Siberia, but we also have permafrost in Lapland. And this permafrost is having a real problem. So what we have to know is that Finland has the largest area of wetland, actually. So we have bogs, we speak of peatland or mires, and they used to cover 1/3 of the country. We speak of palsa bogs. So these are in those palsa that we find the permafrost. They are some kind of formation with a frozen core which never melts, especially not during the cool summer. And this frozen core tends to grow gradually with the winter frost year after year. And those palsa formation can reach several meters, like 10 meters of height, 100 meters of diameter, and they can live several hundreds of years. And those palsa bogs, so what's happening with the frozen core? It evolves, and it grows, and then it collapses, and then we have the formation of a pool. And this pool of water is very shallow and very rich in insects. And this is a place where there are lots of migratory birds like waders, because they thrive in that kind of environment. Another thing you have to know, I told you about peatland. So if we speak of peatland, we speak of peat. And what is the peat? Peat is like turf, and peat is composed of plants such as mosses, like sphagnum, which decompose very, very slowly in wet environment under anaerobic, meaning without oxygen. And if the balsa box are jeopardized because of the warming, what's going to happen? It's going to affect the distribution of the birds, because we are going to have less migratory birds because there won't be any more, so those pool of waters. And they are going to get drier because of, we expect more periods of drought, so this is going to be a problem. And then, if the decomposition of the peat accelerates because it's getting drier and drier, this is going to be a problem, because the peatland used to accumulate carbon. They are carbon stock, carbon sinks, and we have 5.3 billion tons of carbons which are in those bogs, in those peatland areas, with 2.1 in Lapland, which is the largest stock of carbon in Finland actually. So if they get drier, there is a risk that they are going to release carbon eventually, and they are going to become carbon sources, and there won't be any more carbon sinks. So this is a problem. And another problem is that another greenhouse gas might be released. This is the methane. So that's another thing, because this can also lead to more warming. On the other hand, because we also expect heavier rainfalls, what is going to happen with the heavier rainfalls? What's going to happen is that the bogs actually in Lapland perhaps won't suffer as much as in the rest of the world. That is possible too. But in any case, what we know is that the dynamics of the carbon and methane is going to be pretty much affected. So this is also the Finnish Environment Institute, which has made some research showing us that with an increase in the temperatures equal to 4 degrees, we are going to have a disappearance, unfortunately, of those balsa by the year 2100. And sadly, they might have a considerable decline already by 2050. So actually, already half of the bogs are quite threatened by climate warming. So I'm not telling you very optimistic things, I'm afraid. But that is the real situation, that is what is happening. So what are the effects on the biodiversity? So temperatures are increasing, snow is decreasing, ice is decreasing. So the disappearance of snow cover will be harmful precisely for plant and animal species which are adapted to those snowy conditions. The species will be affected by the shortening of the snow cover, and this is going actually to affect the vegetation, the structure, actually all the biotopes, because there are many plants which are dependent on the snow. Actually, those plants which live in the fells, where are the perennial snow patches. The species will be affected by the advance of the tree line, and the tree line is actually moving 100 meters onwards, northwards, every 0.6 degrees increase in temperature. So by the end of the century, we might expect like 350 meters advance in the tree line. And gradually, the vascular plants are going to replace the mosses precisely. And the species are going to be affected by the temperature increase in spring, with the earlier snow melt precisely, which is going to stress the species through both the daily temperature and the harsh night frost. And eventually, the species will be affected by the timing of the leaf burst and the flowering, which is going to occur earlier because of the warming. So all the structure and dynamics of the ecosystem will change. So if the climate change has effects on the plant phenology, soil nutrients availability and distribution of organisms. And one thing we have to know is that those ecosystems in the fells are very sensitive, actually. So they might suffer a lot. And actually, they include a range of biotopes from actually xeric-rich lichen mountain birch forest to perennial snow patches. And some of those, yes, thank you, we have a lecture here. So we have lots of disturbances tonight, apparently. So those mountain birch forests are already affected quite a lot by the overgrazing by reindeer. So this is already a problem. And we expect also that those ecosystems are going to be quite disrupted also by the pests coming from the south, by the periods of drought, and also the heavier rainfall. So many factors affect those ecosystems. On the other hand, I have heard about new research telling that the mountain birch forest could be regenerated by reindeer. But so far, what I have seen, because I used to study reindeer, so what I have seen is that their overgrazing affects more negatively those mountain birch forests than anything else. Because we have like 200,000 reindeer, in Lapland, and it is true that they have definitely kind of overeaten and overgrazed the lichens, and lichens they regenerate very slowly, like it takes 10 years. So I wouldn't really think that's the right theory to think that they could help regenerating those mountain birch forests. So what's happening with the plants from the fells? Will they go extinct? Well, usually the plants from the fells, they have a relatively wide range of temperature, if I may say, yes, temperature adaptation actually, or tolerance. Only a few species so have a narrower tolerance, and only a fewer species precisely are going to suffer. And these are the few examples I'm showing you here. Usually those plants which live in the fells, they can adapt. So they can adapt by dehydrating their cells, or they can avoid the freezing temperatures. And they avoid the freezing temperatures thanks to the isolation that is given by snow. So here the examples we have is the glacier buttercup. This is also a plant that we find in high altitude in the Alps. But I may remind you that the plants we find in high altitude are also in high latitude, like in Lapland. These are the same, at least for some. And the glacier buttercup lives at the edge of the snow beds. And it really likes precisely this protection given by the snow. It's dependent on it because it likes the cool and the hydric condition that is given by the snow. It's very important for it. And what we can observe is that its distribution has started to decrease, and it might go extinct, actually, if the warming continues like this. And what we have observed also is that its distribution is now higher in the fells than it used to be. So here, if we have a look at that's Finland. So this is the map done by the Finnish Museum of Natural History and the University of Helsinki, and that shows you the distribution of this glacier buttercup. As you see, this is very isolated. And these are the observations, actually, observation places that have been made since like the end of the 19th century. So we find fewer and fewer of those plants. And another species I wanted to show you is the arnica, that is also quite famous, and the Lapland rosebay, so that's also very typical in Lapland. Those are also threatened with the warming. And another thing I want to add with the glacier buttercup is that it's actually already threatened by the reindeer, because it's a delicacy for them, it's a dessert. So you add the climate change as a threat factor, so we really don't know what's going to happen with the species at the end of the century. So now, what is happening to mosses and lichens? Mosses are bryophytes. So the mosses are very important species actually to the ecosystems because they actually help to keep the environment moist for the other plants. So they are very, very important. And they also give those stunning colors to the landscapes. We have 204 species of mosses and liverworts, a little bit more complicated words, so in Finland, and already 66% of them are threatened by the climate change. And one thing I want to tell you, you probably all have heard about this IUCN, International Union of Conservation of Nature, yes? They edit a red data list like every 10 years. And if we compare the data list in Finland 10 years ago and now, we can see that climate change has become a threat factor for like almost all the species. So maybe some people won't think that mosses and lichens are important, but they are very important for the ecosystems in the fells. And this is really terrible to see that they are already declining. And one moss species has already gone extinct because of the warming. So think about it. It's going very fast. So here are a few examples, some mosses which thrive on the snow patches. So if the perennial snow patches vanish, so obviously those mosses are going to vanish as well. And this is very interesting because I have seen some pictures of these perennial snow patches taking every 10 years on a duration of 50 years, and you can see that many of those have already gone, you know, like in the Alps. So it's terrible. So I was just telling you about the lichens. So with the lichens, it's the same situation as for the mosses. The proportion of threatened lichens has doubled in 10 years in Finland due to the forestry, the pollution, and also climate change nowadays, which is now a threat factor for 19 lichen species. So I want to show you some pictures that are also presented in the exhibition if you have time to go and have a look at it. So, what about the forest? By the way, it was the thematic of the day, the forest, but now Michael Funch is not here, but I wanted to thank him that it was possibility to have already my lecture about the Arctic today, because it was kind of fully booked during the Arctic session of Saturday, but I was actually, or I'm hoping that it will raise you some awareness for the Arctic before the Arctic Day, precisely. But yes, the forest thematic, so what's happening? Well, you know that forests, of course, they play a very important role in climate regulation because they do store carbon. We all know that. And in Finnish Lapland, we have 9 million hectares of forests that are composed with birch. We have 3 types of birch, with Scots pine, with Norway spruce. And when I speak about the birch, we have the mountain birch, especially, which lives in the tundra and in the fells of Lapland. And what we can observe is that the tree line is advancing, you know, it's progressing northwards. And with this advance of the tree line, we have more deciduous species, like precisely birch, which have a tendency to replace the Scots pine and the Norway spruce. On the other hand, it is possible that the Norway spruce and the Scots pine will benefit more from the warming. This is actually what we know. But I have some models, more models to show you. I hope you won't get a headache after all this. You know, I try to be as simple as possible. This is a research which was made by the University of Eastern Finland by the team of Seppo Kellomäki. And Seppo told me that those models are still valid, although I actually used them in the exhibition already 3 years ago, and they are updating them. So there will be new models quite soon available. Now, when we have the change in the color, the more we have red, the better is the growth of the trees. So we expect that there will be an increase in the growth, precisely because more warming, more carbon dioxide for the birch, the Scots pine and the Norway spruce. But that's pure theory. Because what is going to happen? You remember, there will be the occurrence of heat waves and more periods of drought. So trees' condition is going to be weakened because of this. There will be more parasites, more pests coming from the south. For instance, the spruces are going to be affected by a fungi named Heterobasidium for the scientific name, which is going to affect their roots. And then we are going to have more pests like moths. And the moths, they are some kind of tiny butterflies whose larvae can defoliate entire birch, mountain birch forests. So that kind of, this is very bad. And mountain birch forests, they suffer from massive outbreaks of two types of moths, the autumnal moth and the winter moth. So that's kind of also very dramatic, because in the past they used to suffer more from the autumnal moth, but now we have the winter moth to this. So what's going to happen? Does it mean that we are not going to have anymore in the fells the mountain birch? Well, no, it's not like that, because mountain birch can regenerate in summertime when it's warmer. And we also expect that perhaps there are going to be predators of those pests. That is possible. But one thing that we do not know is, are those pests going to be affected by the warming or not? This is something we have no idea at the moment. So let's see what's going to happen. But again, some researchers claim that those mountain birch could regenerate better thanks to the reindeer grazing. But I truly doubt that. But well, you know, there are many models and many theories. So that's what research is about also. But what is important is the observations we make on the field also. So now, let's speak precisely. I've just told you about the moths. So let's speak about the insects in general, and let's speak about butterflies. So butterflies are the best indicators of climate change. And what we can observe is that they have had the fastest shift in their range in Finland than anywhere else in the world. So that's very interesting. And we have observed a shift equal in average to 60 kilometers. Of course, there are a few species which have shown, you know, an expansion towards north, faster and further. But in average, it's 60 kilometers. Here are a few examples of local species of butterflies that we find in the fells, and those are already showing a decline. Those observations are made usually either by amateur entomologists or by scientists. Like, for instance, again, research made by the Finnish Environment Institute by Juha Pöyry, who is the specialist of this. And there is recent research actually which tell us that butterflies tend to feed more and more on nitrophilous plants having a high content in nitrogen. And those butterflies are called multi-voltine species, meaning that they produce several generations a season. And something interesting is that normally in the north, we used to have butterflies producing only one generation. They were univoltine species, but this has changed. Here are some species coming from the south, and I'm pretty sure that some of you know this poplar admiral, which is in Central Europe and which is coming further and further north. And that is amazing, because this is something to remember with climate change always. Southern species move northwards, whereas local species are declining. So another graph, you are going to wonder what is it. So this is precisely also made by Juha Pöyry, so from the Finnish Environment Institute, and actually that looks very complicated, but the trend is to show us that there are more and more multi-voltine species producing several generations a season, so in the north, showing us that the climatic conditions from the south have come to the north. So, how about if we speak about the birds now? Maybe that would be more appealing for some than the insects like butterflies. Well, actually, the birds also, they suffer a lot. Climate warming is very detrimental to the birds, especially to the migratory birds, actually, because, you know, there is earlier spring, so they have to adapt their breeding season with the, with the food, so availability. So we have the same trend as for the butterflies. Here you can see research, again models made by University of Helsinki. So in blue color, it shows us the suitable climate. And the suitable climate for species living in the fells, like here we have an example, this is the rock ptarmigan. The suitable climate is decreasing because it's getting warmer. So what does it mean, a suitable climate for the rock ptarmigan? This is a bird which likes to live on the barren summits where snow is very tender. And it requires tender snow to build its nest. It requires tender snow to have a shelter against the predators and also to find his food and for his reproduction. So this bird distribution has started to decrease because with the warming we have also a change in the snow conditions. And the change in the snow conditions, what does it mean? It means that with spring coming earlier, with temperatures getting warmer, we have quite often some frost, meaning that the snow that has melted freezes again, and then we have an ice crust on the top of the snow. And if there is an ice crust, it makes it impossible to dig underneath the snow precisely, to dig the shelter. So that's a problem for many, many animal species. So another example of bird is the blue tit, very common also in Central Europe, not so common, well actually, which was not earlier in Lapland. So this bird distribution, as you can see, is moving northwards because the climate is becoming more suitable because it's getting warmer. And I have some friends who live at the border of Norway, so on this northwestern side of Finland, and they have already shown some populations of blue tit there. So it seems like quite abnormal, but it also somehow tells that concretely the things are going even faster than the theory. Because what is going to happen there is like by 2050, actually. So it's quite near us. So in general, we have like 27 species of birds which are already threatened. So in the fells, in the swamps, and also in the forests. And 27 of the species might lose 84% of their habitat by 2080, actually. So that's quite a lot. And in the bogs area, there are already 40% of the bird species, so of the nesting couples, which have decreased. So this goes very, very fast. And recent research was made by the Finnish Environment Institute and also University of Helsinki, so by Raimo Virkala and Aleksi Lehikoinen, and that tells us that if we consider a 1,000 kilometers gradient from north to south of Finland, we are going to have a shift equal to 37 kilometers northwards of the bird species. And this shift in the species density is quite interesting in that sense that most of the birds which live in the forest tend to shift northeast. And why? Because Finland is at the edge of the Eurasian boreal forest actually, so it's kind of logical that the forest birds move northeast, whereas the other species are going to move more to the west actually. So this is new research, and it also tells us that we don't have any correlation between the shift in the temperature and the shift in the species density, because the climate warming is not the only driver of this shift, but also other factors like actually the human land use, for instance. That is also very important, and that is important to consider for future conservation plans actually of those species. And another thing, we observe a difference between the migratory birds and the local residence bird and the partial migrants birds actually, because the migratory birds don't show the same shift. They also tend to shift more to the west, whereas those local birds and the partial migrants shift more to the northeast. And why is it so? Because actually they know what is winter, what are the winter conditions, and somehow they can track better what is the climate warming in that sense, what are the effects. So they are better indicators, those birds. And speaking about migratory birds, these are the observations made by the local Lapland Association of Ornithologists based in Rovaniemi. You remember, the capital of Lapland. And so Jukka Jokimäki, who is an ornithologist, has actually given me those data. And lately, actually, I asked to get even more data starting from 1900, so those are from 1947. And if we compare the past situation to the recent situation, what we can see is that the migratory birds, they arrive in average from 2 to 3 weeks in advance. So this is also very interesting that, and for instance, myself, I observed quite recently that the swans and other duck species were still here, like the beginning of December. So it sounds really, amazing and impossible, because they should have gone already by September. And then they arrive earlier during the spring migration. And actually, if I speak about my own experience, I could tell you that when I made my very first fieldwork, when I made research with reindeer, in October 99, it was already 20 degrees below by the end of October, with snow and ice everywhere. And now 2 weeks ago, we still had like +2, with snow, snowfalls, and the snow melted away. Right now it might be 10 below with snow which has, come, but will it stay? That's another thing, we don't know. Because we have more and more dark Christmases without snow, also in Lapland, in Rovaniemi, for instance, and that sounds completely impossible. Sorry. So, and another fieldwork I remember was in February 2001, still studying reindeer at that time, freezing my bones, watching reindeer activities, what they were doing. We had 3 consecutive weeks of 40 degrees below. And we don't have this anymore. And you remember the average duration of the thermal winter. So less days with that 40, 30 degrees below. Winter is shortening. And I have discussed with local people who actually tell that in the past we could have snow and ice till June, till what we call the midnight sun, in Finland. And sometimes snow could also occur already by August. That is not the case anymore. So things are really, really changing, and very rapidly, because I could observe this like in 18 years. So, sorry. So now if we speak about what's happening with small mammals, so what is it, that one? This is actually the mascot of the exhibition. This is a small rodent that is called a lemming, very cute. Looking very angry. Well, on the poster of the exhibition it looks angry because it's angry at what human has done against him. This is the angry lemming. So it's the same as with the rock ptarmigan. You remember what was happening? I should ask you questions, who has followed or not. So you remember that the rock ptarmigan was suffering because the snow was becoming, who can tell? Yeah. Yeah, harder snow. There was the ice crust, on the top of the snow, yes. So it was impossible to dig underneath. It's the same situation with the lemming. So here we have that kind of drawing that is also in the exhibition, which show us what is a bad winter and a good winter. And in good winter condition, look, the lemming, they can dig underneath the subniveau, surface of the snow. They can dig their shelter and they can find their food, their mosses. Bad winter, look, there is the ice. They can't dig. So sadly, if they can't find their food, and if they cannot find shelter from the predators, what's going to happen to them? Yeah, their populations are going to decrease. So this is a huge problem, because lemming are endemic to Fennoscandia. And usually they have massive changes, in their population numbers, because they can have peak of migrations actually when their populations are growing. And when we have migrations, we have had, for instance, a peak in 2011. There were like tens of thousands of lemmings in the fells of Lapland. This is very impressive to see. I didn't have this luck, actually, this opportunity. I have met them very sporadically. And those lemmings are going also to be affected. Their populations are going to be affected on the long term. And if their populations are affected, so also the predators. it's going to be a vicious circle. And who are the predators of the lemmings? The snowy owl and the Arctic fox, for instance, and their populations, so same way. The whole food chain, is affected by those changes. So now, I want to show you some pictures of the exhibition of other animals. Here we have the snowy hare, and here we have another type of ptarmigan. This is the willow ptarmigan this time, not the rock ptarmigan. This one lives in the forest. So what's the common factor between the species? They changed color. They changed color regarding the photoperiod, meaning that the sun is actually the signal in the change of color. This phenomenon is hormonal. It happens in what we call the pineal gland. And then when spring is coming, we have more light, and then the contrary during wintertime, we have more dark. So they are becoming white in wintertime and brown in summertime. So what's the problem now with the warming? You remember snow is melting earlier? So do they have time to change color? No. Sadly not. So I've met actually many snowy hares which are still white when there is grass. So there is no more camouflage and predators can find them more easily. Speaking of predator, here we have what we call a wolverine. The wolverine is protected in Finland. It's not a bear. It's not from the bear family. It's not a canid. It's not from the dog family either. It's the biggest Mustelidae in Europe. Same family as the hermine and the pine marten. So only 250 in Finland. That's not much. Not many. Sorry. So the wolverine is also affected by the warming because it requires also tender snow to build its den. And if no more tender snow because of the changes in the snow conditions, then the wolverine population is going to decrease. And that we can observe it already. Another animal that changes color, and that is the predator of the lemming, precisely, the Arctic fox. The Arctic fox, we have only a few encounters, actually less and less. The last observation of the den in Finland was in '96, so to tell you that if maybe there are in the north like 10 or 12, Arctic foxes, and observations in Finland actually have become very, very rare. And I was discussing with nature photographers who told me that 20 years ago it was still possible to meet them, but not anymore. But I have also heard that perhaps they are going to come back, actually, and there are still some in Norway, so let's hope that the populations could increase again. But their major problem is that the Arctic fox is in competition with the red fox. The red fox is moving northwards also. And the red fox can feed better nowadays in the tundra area, especially in the alpine tundra, because of reindeer. There is reindeer herding, and it can find some reindeer carcasses to feed on. So that's why their populations, have also shifted northwards. And they are both in competition for the same prey and the same habitat. You still can listen for a while. You are not too tired yet. We still have time. Another example that is very dear to me, this is the moose, because it was the first animal I studied, actually. I was following moose in the taiga, not in Lapland, but in Karelia, in eastern part of Finland. Moose is pretty much affected by the warming in that sense that it really starts panting at 20 degrees, and already 14 degrees Celsius is difficult for him. Moose suffers from insect harassment. Yes, we are going to have higher insect harassment with the warming and more pests coming from the south, new parasites that are going to affect those animals. Moose doesn't suffer from mosquitoes, but from tabanids, so from what we call deer flies, the deer cat. Well, that doesn't tell anything for you, but these are the name of those species. And if its condition becomes weakened because of this insect harassment, it will affect its reproduction capacities and its populations on the long term. So this is going to be a real problem as well. But moose is also going to suffer from the heavier snowfalls, in that sense that it will be more complicated to walk, to make the movements in the snow, more difficult to escape the predators. So it will spend more energy to escape both the insect harassment and in wintertime to move in the snow. So it is likely that in the future there are going to be less moose, although at the moment they are regulated by humans because of hunting. But on the other hand, we don't know what's going to happen by the end of the century, so it could be that really there will be an impact on those populations. There is a very interesting study that was made by the University of Eastern Finland. It was Markus Melin who gave me those models. And here, where you have the red spots, it shows you a moose equipped with GPS collars. And it's very interesting because when it's very warm, by 28 degrees, moose tend to hide in the very high canopy and dense canopy. And when it's a very cool day, then they can be in the bogs, they can be in the open areas, they can be near the lakes. And excuse me. And this is what I have observed myself when I was following them, actually. Because on those days, especially when it's very warm, with very high insect harassment, they really need to find a relief in those dense spruce forests, for instance. So, another example, the last but not least, is reindeer. Also very dear to me, because I made my PhD about reindeer behavior. And those animals, actually, they can stand very extreme temperatures, extremely low temperatures. They have better capacities of adaptation than moose, actually. And some research tell us that they could benefit from the warming because there is going to be an increase in the growing season. Oh, that's something I haven't told you, by the way. Yes, the season, as you know, are going to change, and what we call the growing season is going also to change. It has already changed from, like, let's say in 50 years, is it like 8 days, so in advance actually. So if we have an extension of this growing season, that means reindeer can find forage for over a longer period of time. So, and usually they are capable of recovering and finding more proteins, more fat in their diet during those times of the year when we don't have snow. So it can be true that it can improve their condition actually, but that's only one theory. Because the other theory, and I would believe more in this one, is that they are going to suffer from you remember, the snow conditions that are becoming worse and worse. You remember the ice crust? Yes. The rock ptarmigan was suffering from that. The lemming was suffering. And also reindeer. Because in wintertime, they really like to feed on lichens. This is their favorite food. And if they cannot dig in those craters, here we have a reindeer digging underneath the snow to find lichens. So if the snow conditions are bad and if they cannot find their lichens anymore, it can affect also. It can affect their growth, and it can affect, on the long term, of course, their populations. And what we have observed in Lapland is that already some reindeer, many reindeer actually, have died because of those bad winters. And reindeer herders try to compensate by providing with fodder, artificial fodder. And this is also a paradox, actually. So it's like a diplomatic crisis, if I may say so. So I'm not here to speak about this, but if you consider in Rovaniemi area, the reindeer herders, they do feed their reindeer in wintertime with lichens that they import from eastern part of Finland, with hay and artificial fodder. But in the Sami indigenous area in northern part of Lapland, they don't want to do that because they want to keep a traditional reindeer husbandry. So in that sense, this is, you know, like they have opposite philosophies. And we don't know what's going to happen on the long term by 2100, whether there is going to be rain in Earth's country or not. So it's not very optimistic either. But I mean, everything I tell you is actually pessimistic. So you are going to regret that you have come to attend such a lecture. But, you know, that's a sad reality. So here we have a snowy owl. The snowy owl actually used to be found in the southern part of the tundra, and now we find it more and more in the, well, actually mostly in the alpine tundra. And you remember that was one of the predators of the lemmings. So it looks at humans. What have you done? What have you done to Lapland? What have you done to the Arctic? And before I thank you for staying till the end, I have a few more things to tell you, a few more things, yes. I invite you to go and visit the exhibition in the Green Zone, if you have time, of course. And if you don't, there is another message with the exhibition, Climate Change in Lapland, What Can We Do? So the other message is that precisely, we can all change our consumption behavior. We can reduce our consumption. We can recycle more. We can reuse what we have. We can also use our two legs, you know, instead of a car. I don't have any car, I manage very well. We can use more common transportations. We can use more renewable energy. That's also the message of the exhibition. And in Finland, people use more and more solar energy and wind energy. That's possible, although we have, you know, 3 months of dark winter and 3 months of continuous, like summer and daylight. So in that time we can use it, and we can, you know, we can alternate between wind energy, solar energy. There are more and more possibilities that are available for all of us. We can also eat more local food, seasonal food, organic food, adopt a more vegetarian diet, because, you know, the production of meat generates a lot of greenhouse gases. So I think this is all those things, and this is usually what I try to teach to the school kids. All those things are available for all of us, and if we change our behavior, if we adopt a more, you know, ecologist daily attitude, I think we can really fight climate change. I do believe more in our actions to all of us than any political or governmental decisions, because we are the future, and of course children are the future, and they are the ones to whom we let a planet which is sadly, you know, in very bad conditions, which we are going to change the things. And I'm glad that we have here friends and colleagues from Africa who have come, because I have, you know, a goal which is to raise the public awareness to the Arctic environment and also to bring it to Africa. And I wish that we are going to cooperate, because those changes that are observable in the Arctic, so they are also in Africa. So we can really do work together, and we can take actions, and I think then we are going to succeed something all together. Thank you so much for your attention. Enjoy the COP22. If you have any questions, please. Yes.
Thank you. Congratulations. I will try to speak in English.
Thank you.
As an African, I understand, but in Finland, this is a sensitive situation. And as you said in your presentation, there will be less days with below temperature.
That's right.
And there will be more days with higher temperature. Does that mean that if nothing is done, that Finland, which is the coldest area, could have be transformed to be like a tropical area in long term?
Well, you know that some of the climate deniers would tell that climate has always changed, and where we have now the ice land used to be tropics. Yeah. So right now I cannot tell you that there is going to be tropics, you know, in Finland yet.
Yeah.
But but the snow cover is going to decrease. I think I was telling you it's going to decrease by 20 to 30% by the end of the century, and snow will still be in Lapland. In principle, we are still going to have some perennial snow patches, and unfortunately, snow will occur more sporadically in southern Finland, in Helsinki. This is what we are going to observe. So definitely not tropics yet, but less snow, less ice, and this will affect the whole biodiversity there. Yes, it's a fact.
In that case, I think that even Nordic country will need now adaptation fund
Yes,
as
yes.
African country.
Yes, they will need. Other questions?
Those models that you were showing of invasive species like larvae of moths or butterflies or mammals,
Yes.
have they done any model with interaction between species?
Sorry, I couldn't hear.
Have they done any models with interaction between species?
I really can't hear. Sorry. Have they done?
Models considering interaction between species. For example, if you get a new moth, probably you have also a predator of that. Have they considered interaction between those, or is only one species
No.
that they show in there?
Yeah, actually, there are some models. I haven't been focusing so much on those, I have to say. But yeah, I don't have actually those data yet. So, but I've heard that there are already some things which are done, but mostly they focus on the species individually. Yes,
Okay.
so we don't really know yet so well what are going to be the interactions. But for instance, one example was between this Arctic fox and red fox, for instance. So
Yeah.
how they interact. So a few species only. Yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And of course, we know with the plants, between the deciduous species and the shrubs that are going to replace gradually the mosses. Excuse me. So that we know actually that there are models for this. Yes. Yes.
Yes. Do you know if there are effects to cloudberries? What kind of?
Yes.
Do you think
There
will there
are.
be problems?
There will be. I didn't want to tell you everything because it would have lasted hours. So that's also in the exhibition in there. So, but yes, sadly the berries also situation is changing a lot. Yes, they are affected. And for instance, in Lapland, what we can observe is that the berries yield has decreased since for the past 50 years. So whether it's for the cloudberries, the blueberries, or the lingonberries. And the local people, because it's very, very important actually to listen to what the locals have to say, not only the scientists, but they have also observed a decline in the berries yield. Yes, and because precisely of this earlier spring, and because, when the snow is melting and then it's freezing again. So there is no more isolation by snow. That's one of the problems. And same situation with the mushrooms. We can also observe that some of the local species have declined and some southern species are moving northwards as well. Yes. Any more questions?
Any question?
Well, I think now we are good with this lecture. Then thank you so much once again. And I'm looking forward to seeing you in the green zone where is the exhibition. And we are going to have more lectures there, and next week a lecture debate as well, so with the local people. So that is again very important to have brought here to Morocco, to have had this great honor to bring the exhibition in the Mediterranean and in the African continent. So I'm sure that we can really manage some plans together. So thank you.
Et moi, il faut que je me fasse ça.
Alors que vous veniez dans la partie verte, justement. Bien, merci.